Welcome to Memory, Ridley Scott's Alien and Mythology with Alexandre O. Philippe. My name is Daisuke Miyao. I'm the director of film studies. I'm very excited to be here with the distinguished filmmaker, Alexandre O. Philippe, today with us here. I'd like to, hi, Alexandre, welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. I am super excited to hear your stories about your filmmaking, particularly memory. But let me introduce you briefly before asking you a question.
Okay.
So Alexandre Philippe, he is a filmmaker and a creative director at Exhibit A Pictures. He received an MFA in dramatic writing from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, where I received my PhD as well. His film that he's talking about today, Memory, The Origins of Alien, was premiered as the opening midnight film at the 2019 Sundance Film Festival and was released theatrically on home video and VOD, SVOD by Screen Media, Region M, and Dogwolf. This is part of a trilogy or horror trilogy with two other films. One of them, most recent one, is Leap of Faith, William Friedkin on The Exorcist, which premiered in competition at the 2019 Venice International Film Festival, Venice Classics. And in 2017, Alexandre's postmodern deconstruction of Hitchcock's Psycho, 78/52, Hitchcock's shower scene, also premiered at the Sundance Film Festival as the only documentary film in the popular midnight section. Alexandre describes his film as film essay. Well, the term essay film has been a well-used critical term in film studies to describe works by, let's say, French New Wave directors, Chris Markel, Aaron Rene, those films that blur the distinction between fiction and documentary, self-referential or self-descriptive way. But what I like about Alexandre's essay film, film essay, is its creativity. He always, in dialogue with important films in film history like Alien, Exorcist, and the makers of those films, with the specific themes or motifs that he imagines. So it's more like creative work of him in dialogue with the masterful works of cinema. So in that sense, I am really curious to hear more about his recent film, Memory, The Origins of Alien. If we talk about the cinematic arts at UCSD, we are opening the new center, /Islani Center for Cinematic Arts from this coming year. And I personally hope that we bring back Alexandre Philippe to the new center and talk more about his trilogy. So in that sense, today's event to me is kind of like a preview of more events to come. So please join me and welcome Alexandre Philippe, the filmmaker.
Thank you so much, Daisuke. Really, really appreciate it. And perhaps to set the stage, do we want to show the trailer to Memory? And by the way, I do want to acknowledge, obviously, my company, Exhibit A Pictures. We've been together for, over a decade now, making films, mostly films about film, as you mentioned, and also our partners, Screen Division and Milk House, and our wonderful distributors, Legion M, and the Screen Media as well. So yeah, let's roll the trailer.
Every film is a product of its time and tells you something about the time it was made. There's a special status that comes to some films that lodge in the audience's collective imagination. Alien is certainly one of those films.
Alien is a radical break with science fiction and that sanitized view of space.
Hans Jaeger's images, they were sexual, mechanical, biological, and Ridley Scott was a gift from the gods.
Ridley wasn't certain how that was going to happen. All this innards of a cow and the blood.
That was Ridley wanting this to connect to the phobias that come from our ancient past.
They were all thinking about this as more than a science fiction adventure in the future.
There is a commentary in there about what we're doing as human beings.
Questions of where did life come from? What does it mean to be human?
One scratch from global disaster.
It's about those monsters outside the movie theater. It's haunting.
Alien was talking about something that we're still not comfortable addressing.
Congratulations again to the successful completion of this fantastic work, Alexandre.
Thank you.
After I watched this film, your film, I couldn't help going back to watch all the Alien films from the very beginning. And I think we are inviting Professor Denise Demetriou with us today. Of course, you know, she is the professor of, Jerry and Jenny Langless Chair in Ancient Greek History, and she's the author of Negotiating Identity in the Ancient Mediterranean, the Archaic and Classical Greek Multi-Ethnic Emporia. So she is definitely the expert of the mythology part of this event. Of course, she's a huge fan of films as well, I believe. So I'm looking forward to discussing Alexandre's film with Denise as well. And she has been the director of Center for Hellenic Studies. And in addition to film studies, I really appreciate Seth Lair, the current director of the Center for Hellenic Studies, the supporter of this event. So the first question to you, Alexandre, is the origins of this film. Right. So could you talk a little bit about how you came up with your idea about the alien and the making of your film about alien?
Yeah, of course. The thing that's interesting about this particular film is that it comes out of or on the heels of 7852, which is essentially, a film about the psycho shower scene. It's 90 minutes, about 2 minutes of screen time. So clearly, I'm a geek, I guess you could say, about about cinema, and I'm very interested in the screen moments that become essentially cultural moments. And there's very, very few. I mean, if you think about especially very specific scenes that have had a lasting impact on culture for decades, they tend to happen probably once in a generation. What's really interesting about, comparing the psycho shower scene with, of course, the infamous Chestburster scene, and I don't think I'm giving any spoilers here to people who are who are watching this, is first of all the similarities between those two scenes. They both happen roughly, halfway through the film. They both take place in a very safe space, a shower or a dining hall. They're both actually happening in a very brightly lit room. So not what we would necessarily associate with horror. They're both shocking moments, and they both completely revolutionized, culture in a way. So I thought at the time, well, okay, great. We've had this very successful film about the psycho shower scene. I'm very interested to see if we can explore the Chestburster scene in the same way. And boy, was I wrong. It turns out that in fact they're very, very different scenes. So we ended up, we filmed quite a bit for about 9 months, And I think I made sort of a cardinal mistake in the sense of thinking that I could have the same approach. And I realized that it was sort of falling flat. You know, the interviews, the content that we were sort of putting together didn't quite work in the way that I envisioned. And it felt like, you know, sort of a glorified, you know, bonus feature. And I'm like, well, this is not the kind of film that I make, because I want to make a film really about the meaning of Alien. And so there was this moment where I thought, you know, it's not clicking, it's not happening. And I wasn't sure that I really wanted to necessarily move forward. But there was one tiny little story that kept sort of sticking to the back of my mind. And I'll tell you the story, and we're going to show a clip about this in a moment. But basically, when the you know, when Ridley Scott was thinking about you know, specifically the Chestburster scene and designing the Chestburster and what the Chestburster was going to look like, he turned to a triptych by the great artist Francis Bacon, which it has a long title. It's 3 Studies for Figures at the Base of a Crucifixion. And that triptych is quite, I mean, it's extraordinary. It actually, in fact, revolutionized the art world in 1944. It erupted onto the art scene the way that the Chestburster scene pretty much erupted onto the screen in 1979. But very relevantly here, he showed that triptych to H.R. Giger as a possible inspiration. And what's remarkable about that triptych is that even though the title hints at the fact that we're looking at a, you know, the scene from the, you know, the crucifixion, is that it has been hijacked by 3 really sort of gnarly figures, which happen to be the furies of Greek mythology. And in fact, Francis Bacon himself has talked about the fact that the furies keep haunting him, or kept haunting him, kept coming back into his work over and over again. And I thought, well, that's interesting. It's a completely esoteric sort of, you know, side story, but let me dig into this and see what I find. And I have to say, from that moment forward, every door started opening. And this is where I started realizing, okay, what we have here on our hands is not a film about the distant future, but it's a film about our distant past. It has to be a mythological, you know, take on Ridley Scott's Alien. And of course, I started, you know, talking to mythologists. Denise, of course, is also featured in the film. And also this opened the door to a very fateful meeting with Diane O'Bannon, who I believe may be joining us here on this webinar today. If Diane is here, hello, Diane. And I have a little surprise because Dan is right here, hiding behind my back. This is a production still from Alien, and of course, you know, Dan really is at the origin of Alien. In fact, his you know, the very first draft of Alien was called Memory, hence the title of our documentary. Memory became Starbeast. Starbeast became ultimately Alien. But you know, at one point, actually, I was thinking about titling Memory Dan O'Bannon's Alien. That was one of the titles that we had in mind, and because obviously the film really is, I think, centrally speaking about him and about his relationship with H.R. Giger and with Ridley Scott. But yeah, so it was that story about Francis Bacon that started it all.
That's fantastic connections. Could you talk a little bit more about the mythology? I mean, well, probably Denise can ask questions to Philippe as well. Yeah.
Alexandra, would you prefer to show the clip first and then talk about mythology?
Sure.
Maybe we should do that.
Yeah,
that's fine. Let's we're going to show a clip about it takes place about, I think, 2/3 of the way into the film, and this is where we start getting into Francis Bacon, and you're going to be able to see that particular triptych and how it relates ultimately visually to the Chestburster.
Perfect.
All right.
It's great to watch that sequence again after 3 years. I guess it's been 3 years, right?
Been 3 years. Well, we probably did the interview, I think, in 2018 at this point.
Yeah, that's right. It was almost 4 years ago. Yeah, and I have to admit, Alexandre, that when I first received the email from your producer, what I saw was in capital letters the word alien. And immediately my mind went not to Alien the movie, but theories about aliens in antiquity and ancient history, and I ignored it for probably 2 weeks before I actually then went back and read it carefully, because there were other things in capital letters like The People versus George Lucas, which I had seen before, and then I thought, oh no, this is actually something I would like to be part of. So I almost didn't participate here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm glad you didn't think we were crazy.
Yeah, no. And I think, the way that you described the process of discovering what actually was the thing that held everything together is very familiar, I think, to researchers in general, because we just keep persisting, right? And then follow our intuition, and then suddenly something serendipitous happens, and we find the thread that sort of holds everything together. And I think that the furies, and I guess the real question is whether we can claim that the xenomorph, the alien of the Chestburster scene, is a form of the furies, whether conscious or unconscious, and what it might represent. Today, 43 years ago, when Alien premiered, or at any other moment in time. And I think that, what the clip showed pretty clearly is that we can definitely very easily see the visual connections, right, between the xenomorph as an embodiment of the furies, because we can trace the genealogy of its shape and form to Ridley Scott, who pointed Giger, to the paintings of Francis Bacon, who had been inspired to paint the furies from this trilogy of Greek tragedies known as the Oresteia, which I mentioned in the clip. But I think more interesting is really to try and think about what the furies might represent, and whether that's something that we can see in the xenoform. Like, how can we interpret the xenoform? And for me, at least, and I think there are going to be as many interpretations of this as there are people who watch the movie. The furies in general in ancient Greek mythology represent guilt. In particular, in ancient Greek mythology, they represent the guilt that a murderer feels who murders a blood relative. And more specifically, it's about children who commit a crime and kill one of their parents, or kill their parents, right? Which is what we see in the myth of the Oresteia, with Orestes killing his mother, and then being hounded by the bloodhounds, he calls them, of his mother. And these are the furies, right, who pursue him, their eyes dripping in blood. And this sort of has to come to some sort of resolution at some point. But if the furies represent guilt, then how does that fit into the narrative of the movie Alien, right? And I think we then have to think of what would the crew of the ship, the Nostromo, be guilty of? Or what crimes are they paying the price of? Are these crimes their own, or are they crimes of humanity? Because they might possibly carry a crime of humanity in general. And that's also something that we see in Greek myth as well, I should say. So for me, when I rewatched the movie, and as Daisuke, when you contacted me to do this, I went and watched the sequels, and then I went and watched some of the prequels as well, because of course one of them is called Prometheus. So I watched Prometheus as well, and parts of Covenant. So it just reminded me of how amazing the movie Alien really is. So I was really honored to be part of your film. But so when I was thinking about this question, what are they guilty of? The things that I could think of, at least, is that the crew itself is not really necessarily guilty of many things, right? I think that they are more or less blameless. But I think humanity, the humanity, I guess, that's presented in this movie could be said to be sort of arrogant or have some kind of excessive arrogance, in the sense that the crew of the Nostromo works for a corporation that's mining different parts of the universe and exploiting and extracting resources from it. So I think, we can see parallels there with sort of imperialism or colonialism, which could bring the Furies, could, I guess, incur the wrath of the Furies. And then I think also we have this creation of synthetic life that we see in the movie, where humans are now creating other life forms. And this perhaps also is excessive in a certain sense, that might also incur this, the wrath of the Furies. And as we watch the movie, we also find out that the synthetic life form that's aboard the ship, Ash, actually is there to ensure that the ship brings back a sample of the xenomorph of the alien, or to bring back the xenomorph itself, which they then plan to use as a weapon. So we can also see war as a crime, that humanity can carry out, and for which it can be punished. And of course, there have been other explanations for this that I've seen, and we can talk about those too. But for me, at least, those are the three things that I generally think of when I think about, okay, why are the Furies here and what could this represent? But I think that guilt is a really powerful emotion for humans, and that's why I think it appeals to us thousands of years later, or throughout perhaps history.
Yeah, I mean, I think I from my perspective, I don't want to spoil memory, because I'm assuming there are people watching this webinar who have not seen the film, which, by the way, is pretty much available, everywhere. I think it's actually Amazon Prime, I think, right now, among other ways. You can of course get the Blu-ray and all that stuff. But to me, I think there's another sort of layer of that, and which is not necessarily this idea of guilt within the film itself, but beyond the film and into our society. And let me sort of explain what I mean by this. What's really fascinating about Alien as a film is that you could make the argument that it was not really supposed to be a hit in 1979. The story itself really had been told in underground comics. It had been told in a number of B movies from the 1950s and 1960s, Queen of Blood, Planet of the Vampires, It's the Terror from Beyond Space. It's a story that sort of lived in the shadows, or in the sort of the underground, in the B realm for a long time. Coming out of the 70s, you've got, clearly people were yearning for a lighter kind of space opera fare that obviously Star Wars gave us, a couple of years earlier, which was obviously clearly a very massive success. But case in point, I think, there's this very sort of famous sort of side by side of two movies that came out literally at the same time in 1982, E.T. and John Carpenter's The Thing. And audiences overwhelmingly embraced the cute, cuddly, friendly alien that we just don't want to let go of, and completely rejected this, of course, marvelous film, this now called classic The Thing, which is very Lovecraftian as well, very dark, has a lot of connecting points as well with Alien. I mean, especially in the sort of the Lovecraftian space. And you have to wonder, wait a minute, why did Alien become this thing? And I think what's really fascinating about this is that we have to go back to the shock, right? Just the way that, in a way, you can deconstruct the shock of the shower scene, and the way that the shower scene, nobody saw it coming, but it sort of really announced, guys, we're no longer in the 50s. Welcome to the 1960s. And the Chestburster announced something. But what's so fascinating to me about this is that historically, it was mostly men who were affected by it. It was mostly men who ran out of the theater to hide in the bathroom when when the Chestburster happened. It's a complete subversion in a way. And it's there. You've got male pregnancy, for crying out loud, in the film, as Axel Carolyn in Memory says. Basically, it's a male rape movie in space, right? And so you have to wonder, do the Furies represent a kind of retribution for the repression of women in society, which was something that, by the way, was really not part of the cultural dialogue, obviously, in 1979, but a cultural dialogue that finally now, a few years ago, we started openly, having in our society. So, and as Clark Wolf mentions in the film, she says Alien addresses the guilt that a patriarchal society feels. So my sense in this is that perhaps we could say that Alien was not the movie that people wanted to see in 1979, but maybe Alien was the movie that people needed to see in 1979. Maybe Alien started to present ideas and themes and images that needed to simmer so that eventually we could start talking about it. And if that's the case, then Alien was literally 4 decades ahead of its time, and yet was still a big success. And I think what's remarkable about that film, and I think that's why I one of the main reasons why I call it a masterpiece, is that I think people responded to it in such a profound, powerful, visceral way, but without really being able to articulate why. And I think also to talk about Dan O'Bannon, H.R. Giga, and Ridley Scott, who I really see as sort of the triptych, if you will, at the core. I mean, there's obviously so many incredible people involved with the film, but at the core, you had to have this sort of symbiosis, of those three. I don't think there was anything conscious about this. Why did Ridley Scott point to this triptych? He wasn't thinking about the Furies. How did Dan O'Bannon end up meeting H.R. Giger on the failed Dune project by Jodorowsky? Had Dune not failed, Alien probably would not exist. How did it, happen to be that Roger Corman, had the vision to say, look, I'll produce your film, but I think you can probably find more money than I can give you, and essentially take it out of the B realm. You've got Dan's, Crohn's disease that he was going through. The fact that he slept on Ron Shussett's couch for a while, coming out of the failed Dune project. And, they started talking about parasites and parasitic wasps and all that stuff. So all of these elements, all of the serendipities that happened as a result of that, you have to wonder sometimes, can it be then that stories and archetypes and monsters are perennial? Can it be that these ideas and monsters and themes from our ancient past come back every now and then to haunt us, but not randomly? Could it be that they come to us sometimes through books, through movies, through culture, because they need to tell us something that we have to hear at a particular point in history? And maybe that's what the Furies are in Alien. I don't know. That's what I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. And of course, the protagonist of the movie is also female, right? Which was unusual for this type of movies in the first place. So, and that was, I guess, what really gave Sigourney Weaver her she became really popular after that. But I'd like to sort of stick with the Furies for one more, I guess, a few more minutes, because one of the things that I've been discussing in my class, one of my classes a lot recently, because they've been reading Greek tragedies, and I know a lot of them are in the audience, is the timelessness of these tragedies. And I think that's something that you were alluding to now in what you were just saying, that it doesn't have to be conscious, it can be unconscious. You have to have all of these different coincidences sort of occurring to get this particular movie. But the timelessness, I think, of these stories is what makes them available to us to use, or consciously or unconsciously. And also they're stories that we can think with, right? So we can actually watch this movie, we can watch Alien today and get a completely different sense of what it's really about than if we had watched it in 1979. Those of us who were still alive then, right? So that's one thing. But I wanted to ask you if we could see the opening sequence where you actually depict the Furies. And then maybe you can talk about how you envisioned them, because something in your answer, something as you were speaking, you were talking about them sort of being these archetypes of a lot of different things. And I just wonder whether that opening sequence was influenced in a way in any way from your own sort of understanding of them.
For sure. All right, let's play the scene. All right. We're going to give people nightmares.
It is the stuff of nightmares.
It is the stuff of nightmares. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So what inspired you to create the sequence? Because there's this combination here of like past and future, and the sound is really effective. The visuals sort of recall the movie.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. Every time I talk about this particular sequence, I don't even know where to begin because there's so much to unpack. Like we could talk about this for probably a couple of hours, but I'll just say that the first thing is I think a lot about this one sort of lyric from an old Genesis song from the album Foxtrot, which is, it goes like this: through time and space, though names may change, each face retains the mask it wore. This idea that through space and time, we all play roles that we recur, we keep coming back. The good and the bad. Look at what's happening in Ukraine right now. Talk about something very dangerous and very scary, sort of coming back to the surface. So this idea that that the Furies, in a way, as I've said earlier, erupted not just within the film, but into culture in 1979. This is why the opening scroll says Temple of Apollo, Delphi, May 25th, 1979, which is the date of the theatrical release of Alien. And so it's a hint at this idea that the Furies essentially erupted onto our silver screens, came out and came back into culture on that day. And so, you've got, that opening sequence was crazy, as, Carrie, our wonderful producer, and, my great business partner will tell you, it was a nightmare to make. It was, obviously, we shot at Delphi. Parts of it were shot in Volterra in Italy, because that particular amphitheater actually reminded me of, some of the ruins reminded me of the Derelict. And we actually shot, it was a night shoot, and it was pouring down rain. And then this wonderful fog came out at 4 in the morning. It was absolutely insanely cool to shoot there. Some of these sort of ancient, weird carvings were shot in Switzerland at the Giger Museum. It's actually what you walk on, and this is what's so great, is that this was all designed by Giger, but because obviously they've been around for a while, and they're all sort of cracked, and so it looked like sort of the walls of an ancient cave. And then, of course, the spaceship set and the Furies, our Furies themselves, We shot in Los Angeles. But as you mentioned, the sound is very important, and I know it's much better in a 5.1 theater than on Zoom to hear Philippe Lloyd Hagel's extraordinary sound design. But basically, the idea was to invert the sound and the picture, so that when we begin at the Temple of Apollo, you're in this sort of womb-like, you hear the sounds essentially of a spaceship, and once you cross the threshold into the spaceship, you start hearing sounds of nature, cicadas. I mean, obviously we had all these insects that we filmed at the Temple of Apollo. You have to wonder, did they just show up serendipitously into into the film, because Dan O'Bannon was quite afraid of insects, of bugs. I forgot to mention that yet another ancient origin of the film itself was actually a pre-memory screenplay that he wrote called They Bite, which Diane very kindly shared with me. It's an extraordinary script. And, without spoiling it, you have to wonder, if those of you and look, I'm a huge fan of The Thing, of the John Carpenter movie, but you have to wonder, after watching the John Carpenter version of The Thing, how can John possibly not have read Dan O'Bannon's screenplay They Bite? It's a terrific script. So anyway, but I digress. We're talking about all these different sort of origins, but yeah, the idea was to really create a very visceral experience. Obviously memory is, you've got two types of audiences in a way. You've got, on the one hand, you've got the massive Alien fans who know everything about the franchise, who've seen everything. And we were I wanted to sort of go deeper and sort of take them into a deeper journey and give them new things. But I'm also very interested, as someone who cares about film studies and who cares about what films do to us, to our brains, to our cultures. It's very important to reach out to people who may have never even watched Alien, right? So for the people who are familiar with the iconography of Alien, of course, there are certain markers that are unmistakable, right? When you get into the spaceship and you see the blue mist, you immediately know what this means. But this is juxtaposed, of course, with something that's not supposed to be at all in Alien, which is the Furies. We have the dialogue, of course, some of the lines from the Oresteia in ancient Greek, spoken first by Mother, the ship itself, awaken my Furies, goddesses of the earth, and then of course the Furies themselves delivering that line that later on in the film we learn will completely obsessed Francis Bacon, and that was at the back of his mind when he created his own triptych. So all of that is meant to, and it was a huge gamble, I'll readily admit, it was meant to pose the film's major dramatic question in a non-narrative way. I mean, and the question is, which we sort of dive into right after this opening sequence, is we establish this idea that the xenomorph is a kind of fury. And what does that mean? So really the question is, what is the relationship between the xenomorph from Alien and the Furies from Greek mythology? Is there something there or not? And this is what really the film sort of explores. And through that particular question gets to explore, the larger themes and ideas of Alien. But I think I was probably unconsciously also inspired by, this was a time when I was, we were also working on Leap of Faith, which is a film about William Friedkin and the Exorcist. I spent a lot of time, many days with William Friedkin and picking his brain. And we spent an entire day talking about his opening sequence in The Exorcist, which, he actually talks about the fact that it's a sequence that you couldn't really make today anymore. It's 10 minutes. It's not it doesn't really have a narrative arc. It just completely pulls you in through this sort of the tone and mood, you know, the sense of dread of an ancient evil coming back, you know. That sounds familiar. You know, so that's it, really. I mean, I think all of that came, you know, subconsciously, I think, in the making of this film, and I trusted that. And I'm, you know, I definitely call myself an intuitive filmmaker, and sort of I like to trust those elements, and it came together in the sequence that we just showed.
Yeah, no, that's it's always fascinating to see the creative process, right, from the person who created this film. And because we are getting close to the hour, I think that let me say a couple of things. I guess one is that your film is really fantastic, and I really encourage everyone to watch it because it just reveals all these things about Alien that I don't think people knew before it appeared. So it's a great film essay. And then I want to remind the participants that please ask questions. Alexandre is here to answer them. And if there are any mythology questions, I can answer them, but really just ask Alexandre things about his movie. And the way to do that is to just type your question in the Q&A box. So please do that. And as for me, I'll hand this over to my colleague Daisuke now, who will moderate the Q&A. And Daisuke, I'm sure you have lots of questions as well.
I do, actually. Not directly connected to or related to furies and let's say the male rape theme of Alien. I must ask you a question about the cat.
I knew you were going to do that.
You know, the famous cat Jones appears in Alien, and as a cat person who wrote a book on cinema and cats, I must ask this question to you in relation to Greek mythology. As some of you may remember that the grown-up alien appears in the film for the first time as a point of view shot of the cat Jones. So is there any implication to that? Are there any mythological reading or possible mythological reading between the Greek cats? Like,
I think I just lost the signal here.
Chimera and
Daisuke?
Yes. Yes.
Oh. Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. It just cut off at is there any implication? I'm gonna keep my video off. Maybe there's the bandwidth problem. I'm gonna visually in just a minute, but
we can hear you though, so that's all good.
Okay, great. I'll come back in a minute. Usually it takes like 30 seconds or so, but
okay.
So is there any implication ?
Yeah, the appearance and the significance of the cat in that film is that mythological fight against two returns of the repressed or
well, that's a
the
whole
survival of the cat in the end with Ripley.
That's a whole other film. I don't know if I should make a sequel to Memory or if you should make a sequel to your book. Maybe both. I don't know. That's a really cool question. I mean, I really and you're right. It's funny because literally when you asked the question, my mind immediately went to that sort of point of view of Jones. It's really, really interesting that he's the one who notices that. But I don't know. That feels more like a mythological question, perhaps to Denise, right? The cat and mythology. I mean, there's also some connections, by the way, to Egyptian mythology. Like Giger specifically was very drawn to Egyptian mythology. In fact, his very first painting of the three stages of the alien. it's been compared to, some of the representations of the goddess Nut, the goddess of the night, I believe, or the cosmos in Egyptian mythology. Again, like Giger was very very intuitive. I mean, sometimes he would paint at night in a trance and sort of not even remember, just wake up to a painting. So you're talking about a lot of sort of unconscious forces at play here, I think in all of that. But obviously the cat plays a key role in mythology. I mean, I'm sure Denise has a lot more to say than I would about this.
Alas, I don't know that I do. The only thing that I could think of when cats in mythology was actually Egypt, because the cats were so much more prominent in Egyptian culture in general. So that's funny, because then you kind of started to talk about Egyptian mythology, and I thought, oh, perfect. But I think that this question also, or what you were just saying, also sort of addresses the first question that we have in the Q&A box, which is, what other Greek mythological elements or forms of symbolism do you think are reflected in Alien? But I think that there's Egyptian mythology, as you said, which is really important to point out, because it's not just Greek mythology.
Yeah, and two quick things I want to say about this. You probably didn't notice, because actually it happens, it's almost a subliminal thing in the opening sequence, but I've never actually mentioned this in a Q&A. There's a very brief shot of the ruins in Delphi, where you see a cat actually sort of hiding within the ruins. And it's funny because I saw that cat a little bit too late, and Robert, our director of photography, was there, barely had time to sort of repo the camera to try. I was like, Robert, we've got Jones, and so he tried to get the cat, but then of course the cat, being a cat, was very good at hiding, and so we just got like a second or a second and a half of the cat sort of disappearing, and so I inserted that as a reference to Jones in the opening. So there you go. So Jones is there. But the other thing I want to say is, and again, without spoiling memory, because hopefully people will want to watch the film, but we actually, there's quite a bit of there's a whole sequence really on Egyptian mythology, I think, in memory. And we actually I found these really cool early sketches from Ridley Scott that were sold at auction, that were essentially unpublished. And they're sort of like Giger, sort of his vision of LV-426 and the derelict, and he literally envisioned this ancient temple. I mean, it's mind-blowing. And then separately, you've got Dan O'Bannon himself, before he even met Ridley Scott, thinking of the derelict ship as a pyramid. I mean, come on. I mean, talk about these guys who didn't even know each other at the time. You add the fact that Ridley Scott himself didn't even like sci-fi. I mean, he acknowledged that he did not like sci-fi. He did not care for it. Yeah, coming from the guy who did, Alien and Blade Runner back to back, unbelievable stuff, right? But that these creators who came together really through serendipity and had these sort of separate yet completely compatible visions about a distant future that had echoes of our ancient past, you have to wonder, like, whoa, like, is mythology alive, really? Are the Furies alive? Did they really sort of like, I mean, there's a frequency. I think actually Will Lynch says that in the film. There's a certain frequency to myth, and you have to wonder, did Dan O'Bannon, H.R. Giger, and Ridley Scott tap into that frequency?
Great. The cat's snarling teeth reminds Doug Evans of the Alien. Thank you for that comment, Doug. there are some other related questions, not cat related, but Greek questions. Does Greek history have anything to do with the names in the movie? Could Ripley be considered a fury since she avenged the father Cain, murdered by the Xenomorph child? Yeah.
That's a question for Denise, I think.
That's an interesting one. I guess I hadn't thought about it in those terms, and we would have to kind of think about how Cain would be Ripley's father. But can she be considered a fury in general? I mean, I think that she does avenge the crews. I mean, you know, the alien keeps killing crew member by crew member. So she does sort of avenge their deaths and fights until the very end to get rid of the alien that hops onto the shuttle anyway that she's trying to escape in. So I think that that's possible, a possible way of reading that. The names of the movie, yeah, Nostromo is Latin, from Latin, not Greek, but close enough, right? We're still talking about ancient mythology or the ancient world. I can't remember what other names are there in the movie that could be Greek or Latin.
Coming from a Greek, well, that's a really good question. Well, I mean, obviously xenomorph, but that's not even, I don't think that's a word that's actually mentioned.
No, I think it's the critics.
That came after. But, you know, it's interesting too, that, I mean, if you think about all the character names and you look at the, you know, Dan O'Bannon's original cast of characters, they all had different names. As a matter of fact, Ripley was not supposed, well, Ripley was not Ripley, but Ripley was not supposed to be a woman initially. That's another interesting fact. You know, I think obviously the film would not have been anything of the success that it was without that. I mean, that also, I mean, talk about another way that the film revolutionized, you know, the medium. What a character
Yeah.
he is.
And just let me, because the same person who asked this question also specified that they meant that Cain gave birth to the xenomorph. So that's the sense in which they were father. But I think for me, there's something, if we see Prometheus and Alien and sort of the whole prequel story that gets to Alien, then I think that there is a way in which because in Prometheus, humans turn out to be the creations of aliens, right? And so they are the children who commit some kind of crime against their parent, and then they sort of maybe getting punished for it by the time that we get to Alien. That's a whole other story, but I think that there are this idea of revenge and avenging might, if we look at the whole story, there may be more things there. My colleague Monty Johnson has a question. Says, thanks a lot, this is great. The horror in Alien seems to be on several levels. For example, not just the visceral gore of the chestburster, but also the Lovecraftian cosmic horror of the aliens being absolutely different to human suffering, etc., in contrast to E.T. I was wondering if this cosmic horror applies to the furies of mythology as well. But they are not different to human suffering. In fact, they avenge human violators of oaths, etc. But the fear they cause seems not to just be from their dim and chimerical visages, but also from a deeper, darker, more inhuman source. I think it might be for me, and I thought that it would be for you. So yeah. I asked it because I didn't read through Monty all the way. Yes, I think that it does apply. I would have to think through this, I guess, a little bit more. But you know, the story of their birth, I think, is relevant here, which we hear about in the Theogony. The Furies are born when Kronos, the god, actually castrates his father. The blood that drops from the genitalia that they drop in the sea, but the blood drops onto the earth, and then the earth becomes pregnant, and the Furies are one of the things that sort of appear from that. So I think that Monty is onto something here as well.
I remember that we talked about Kronos during our interview, and in fact, this is something that I really wanted to bring into the film. But you know, it's just one of those really difficult questions, when you make a film like this, which, I think that's one of the fundamental differences really between making a film about film, something that has to be a theatrical experience or that people have to be able to enjoy, whether it's in a theater or on their laptop, versus, an actual book, which you can put down, you can think about it, you can reflect, is that it has to be accessible. More accessible, more readily accessible, I think. And so I know we put together a scene about Kronos, and then ultimately we felt like, maybe that was going a little bit too deep for the film. But I love that story because, that's another example of castration, I guess, in a way of. It certainly, there's I always saw a relationship there. That I thought was really cool, but we just couldn't make it work within the context of the film.
Speaking of characters, there's a question from Matthew, talking about the idea of humans creating. What role do the androids play in this greater conversation? Why do you think they were designed in a way they were? There are many unsettling details about them, like the weird white liquid that oozes from them when they are hurt or damaged.
Yeah, Ash is a piece of work, obviously, as a character, and I think certainly there's actually a great scene. It's one of my favorite moments in memory of Clark Wolf just going off on Ash. She absolutely hates him as a character, and he's not a very likable character, obviously, but so I'm not going to spoil that because I think that's a really great moment. I don't know. Again, that sort of the white goo. You can probably, there's probably all kinds of stuff you can read into that. It's what's always so interesting to me about thinking about movies, the making of movies, is how much is conscious versus how much is not necessarily, and all the meaning that we tend to, which rightfully, I think that's part of the fun of the exercise, is to think about the hidden meanings, the Easter eggs, the thing that the creators have thought of that we didn't necessarily think about. And I think to a certain extent that's all true, but I think to go back to William Friedkin, when much of the interpretations that have been made about The Exorcist or many of his other films, he basically told me, he says, look, I don't know. That just, why did they do this? I don't know. It just felt like the right thing to do. And I think, but I think when filmmakers or artists operate at that level, I think things start to happen beyond their sort of conscious knowledge. And again, to go back to one of my favorite lines from Axel Carolyn in the film, she said, if Dan O'Bannon, and Ron Shusett had gone to the studio and said, hey, we're making a male rape movie in space, can you give us money? Of course, people would have said no, to that. So I don't know. That's really a question for Ridley Scott, and I think it's a question for all of the people, the incredible people, probably Roger Christian or some of the other people who were involved in the making of that film. It may not be anything beyond that was a cool look,
Well, similarly, probably the issues of conscious and unconscious that you have just mentioned, but there's a question about the numbers. How about the significance of numbers? 7 humans plus the alien, 8 sentient entities on board the ship. 8 is also a very computerized number. Everything in computers is a power of 2. For example, 8-bit, etc. even the corridors, including the one picture behind you, Alexandra, 8 sides, shapes. It seems like there's a strong connection of computers, tech. Mother is looking after the crew. The alien is biomechanical, and perhaps a comment on how technology can rise up and harm humans. Is there anything in Greek mythology reflecting this? The question about number 8.
I can say a little bit about this, and then I don't know, Alexandra, if you want to add something. Yeah, numbers are also important in Greek mythology, but I think the part of the question that's really intriguing to me is how technology can rise up, although the question just disappeared, but how technology can rise up and sort of harm humanity. And I think that actually ancient Greek texts generally, not generally, but several of them, in fact, express an anxiety about technology and technological progress just for the sake of progress. And I think that these ancient Greek texts also provide alternatives for how people should deal with technological progress and how it should be used to benefit their lives in sort of ethical and ways, and to benefit also civic societies rather than just sort of relentlessly progressing without really any thought as to the effect of the technology. So I do think that there is an element in Greek myth that addresses this, and it's actually going to be part of my next project. Oddly enough, this question is sort of prescient, I guess, in that sense. But there you go. So I don't know if you want to add something, Alexandre, to this, or if we should move to another question.
No, I mean, I'm not a numerologist, but no, I mean, sure. I mean, I think all that stuff is really important and relevant and interesting. You know, this is what I love, right? By the way, I mean, to me, that exercise of sort of like digging into films, into great films, this idea that you can never get to the bottom of it, and I think every great film, every great piece of art, that's very true. And the more people you bring to the table, and the more people start sort of unpacking it or thinking about things, or you know, it's virtually endless. And I think it's endless because those movies connect with the human experience in a profound way. The reason why we respond to those movies is because they are connected to a human experience that goes beyond time, that goes beyond space. Right? They're not just movies. And I think that's the point here. And I think that, you know, we could be having a Zoom a week about Alien, and you know, and have a revolving door of either film scholars or just film buffs just showing up, and we would learn something new every single day. And that's what I just love about movies so much.
Yeah, speaking of connections, this is a question from Michael. In memory, the idea of synchronicity between the involvement between Bannon, Geiger, Bacon, and Scott is brought up. Do you think, and this is regards to the sequels and prequels, that the type of unconscious power becomes diluted once overt explanations and other conscious motivations take over? As a side note, your movies are fantastic and very illuminating.
Thank you. That's very kind. I tend to, and I don't want to offend anybody, I tend to really sort of put Alien, the original one, on a pedestal. I like Aliens quite a bit. I don't think Aliens, well, obviously you can certainly say there's no Aliens without Alien, right? You know, I like the third more than most people do. After that, I don't really care so much about the films. But as I've always said during Q&As, you know, Ridley Scott has more than earned the right to make as many Alien movies or anything he wants to do. I just feel that you know, you can never sort of replicate, I think, that magic. And I think there was a very palpable magic, truly. And again, in all of the serendipities and all of the connections that are discussed at length in memory, that you can never duplicate, you know. And so I think that symbiosis, which I really is the way that I see it. I mean, I think Dan O'Bannon needed Giger, and he needed Ridley Scott. If Dan O'Bannon and Giger had not met and connected, there's no Alien. If Ridley Scott had not championed Giger, after Dan O'Bannon basically said, look, I mean, Dan O'Bannon, who at the time had no money, commissioned these extraordinary paintings from Giger, to show what this could be. And when he showed the Necronomicon and, to Ridley Scott responded, and Ridley Scott, in spite of all the naysayers, stuck to his guns and championed Giger and insisted that Giger would be a part of it. So, you could say what you want, but had probably any other director come on board at the time, they would have probably caved to the studio and said, you know what, we like your Giger, but he's just too dark, he's just too messed up, it's just not going to work. And you don't have an Alien, you don't have that sort of greatness of a film. So I think that symbiosis, this sort of the magic that happened with those three people meeting and all the incredible people who surrounded them and all this incredible cast, and coming out at this particular point in history, you add it all up, and how can you possibly duplicate this magic? I don't think you can.
Doug says another Scott movie, Blade Runner, would benefit from this kind of mythical interpretation. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just say briefly that so Blade Runner is one of my all-time favorite films. I love Blade Runner even more than Alien. Blade Runner is a film that at some point in my life, I think in my teens, I was on, there's a period where I was watching it every day, and obviously I was playing the Tears in the Rain scene on repeat. I can't watch that scene without tearing up. It's truly one of the for me, it goes in the pantheon of scenes. It's a transcendent sort of movie moment. And then to think about the fact that this was Rutger Hauer improvising. I mean, this is just one for the ages right there. So yeah, that's a film that at some point I would love to make a film about. is Blade Runner. I don't know that there's anything else I would like to say about that, but yeah, I mean, talk about movie magic. That film is just, yeah, it's brilliant.
Speaking of your future projects, Michael has a question about your next film, Lynch Oz. This is what I wanted to ask you about as well, because you have touched upon Francis Bacon. That is a very influential artist for David Lynch as well, and you have also talked about Dune, which was made into a film in the 1980s by David Lynch as well. So could you tell us a little bit about Lynch Oz?
Yeah, so coming out, premiering in a few months. I can't say where, but it's a big festival. It will be our next film, which is going to be Exhibit Pictures' 8th feature and my personal 10th. So it's kind of a milestone for me. So the title of the film is Lynch Oz, and as the title implies, it is a film about the relationship between David Lynch and the Wizard of Oz. And it's a film that goes down the rabbit hole of this idea that David Lynch is actually trapped in Oz in a way, that every David Lynch film is potentially a form of retelling of the Wizard of Oz. But it's a film that, more broadly speaking, is really about some of the ideas that I think I've been exploring in previous films, including memory. ideas of, about, inspiration and influence. But I think more specifically within the context of Lynch Oz is this idea of, when you grow up watching movies and you eventually become a filmmaker, there's a handful of films that stay with you and that have this very, very powerful impact on you. And whether you like it or not, you will forever be trapped by those films. You will never be able to escape them, and they will always find a way to come back and to return in your work. I mean, Fellini famously said, "I keep making the same movie over and over and over again." Andrew Wyeth, kept painting the same familiar hill over and over and over again. And I think, to me, there's this real sort of beauty about that. And that doesn't mean that, I think, that we're sort of, the artists are sort of one note. Quite the contrary. It means that they love to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the same ideas. And I think in trying to sort of connect with that and understanding that, that's when I think as artists, we start having a sense of what we're about, and that there's no point in trying to escape those things that appeal to us. I mean, for me, my personal sort of film, my one sort of like desert island movie is Vertigo. And I can't escape Vertigo. I don't want to escape Vertigo. Vertigo breaks my heart every single time. And every time that I watch it, it's a completely new and experience. So anyway, yeah, be on the lookout for Lynch Oz. It's a trip. It's a trip for Lynch fans. It's a trip for Oz fans. And I think it's going to be a trip for people who just are interested in films and in the creative process. I'm super proud of the film. We're still putting the finishing touches right now for the premiere, but yeah, I'm super proud of it.
I'm so excited about it, and I'm looking forward to watching that film, as I grew up with the watching Twin Peaks by Lynch, and as you say, Vertigo is definitely the most beautiful and moving film, Hitchcock film, to me too. So I'm looking forward to your project. We still have maybe a time for one or two more questions. If we can go back to memory, maybe. You said that the appearance of the Furies in the film could be interpreted as a form of retribution inflicted due to the repression of women in society. Could you expand on this? I've always thought of Ripley as such a strong female protagonist.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's more necessarily that I want to say about that without completely spoiling that segment in the film itself. But I mean, I think that I want to go back to this idea that I think well, I have to be careful because there's a really cool clip with Helen Mirren actually in the film that sort of sets the stage that I don't want to spoil, but I think that this idea that the Chestburster made men specifically so uncomfortable in the theater in 1979 is a very interesting thing. I think those were images that we were not, this kind of sort of body violence, we were not used to seeing that on a man, obviously. And so I think that this kind of, this particular scene very specifically, had such a very profound effect on culture. And I don't think it was conscious. I don't think it was an intellectual process that people were going through. I think, again, it was a very sort of visceral reaction to the Chestburster, which, by the way, I think another remarkable thing about that scene is that you can also make the argument that the entire film of Alien completely hinges on the success of the Chestburster. And the success of the chest bursting scene relies basically on a puppet on a stick. I mean, that's what it is. And you know, there were a lot of doubts, not just in Ridley Scott, but in the entire crew of, you know, could they really pull this off in a way that's going to be effective? There's a lot of things, again, well documented. You'll see that in memory. A lot of things that went wrong during the making of that particular scene, that a lot of mistakes that turned out to be, in fact, quite serendipitous and quite wonderful for the film itself. But you know, the scene could have completely fallen flat, and I think, you know, the film could have been ridiculous on that front. So so everything hinges on the Chestburster scene. In fact, the Chestburster scene is the reason why the film got greenlit. It was that scene in the script that that basically got, when people, you know, got the executives to go, yeah, we gotta make this.
And actually, the last question that we'll ask from the audience before we thank you, Alexandre, is from my colleague in literature, Dana Clares. And she says, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation. I remember anxiously counting down the days for the release of Leap of Faith, and the wait was absolutely worth it. I have a question about the idea of male pregnancy, speaking unconsciously to something larger in society. Pregnancy as an alien infestation, an abomination. This is such a prominent theme in supernatural horror at that time. Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, The Exorcist. Do you think at some unconscious level, all of these films speak to larger conversations about gender roles, embodiment, especially at that time in the late 70s?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't know how else we can, you know, we can ring that. I mean, I love that you're, by the way, connecting to all of these other films. Yeah, yes, for sure. It's funny because I keep, you know, I keep not thinking about some of the more obvious connections, by the way, that exist between Alien and The Exorcist. And then, you know, thanks for reminding me about this, which is so funny too, because I was not consciously planning on making a film about The Exorcist at all. I was not even thinking about this idea of a trilogy. And I'll just tell a very quick story here, because I believe Gary Sherman, who you saw in the beginning of the Francis Bacon sequence, very briefly on screen, the great Gary Sherman is with us, I believe, in this webinar. So hi, Gary. He actually texted me yesterday to say he was going to be here. But Gary and I were having lunch in Sitges at the Fantastic Film Festival in Spain, and William Friedkin called out my name and invited us to his table. And he had heard about 7852, and you know, he basically took my phone and gave me his phone number and said, you know, next time you're in LA, I want to buy you lunch. And that's kind of how things progressed. It was total serendipity. But and then of course I sort of went, you know, deep, obviously did a deep dive into The Exorcist. But yeah, all these connecting points of movies, one leading to the other, to the, you know, I don't always consciously think about that necessarily. And I think, I mean, I'm sure we could write a whole book on pregnancies in horror films. I mean, and not just in the 70s. I mean, we're talking also about, there's a lot of recent films that there's the French film Inside, which is quite gruesome. That deals with that as a central theme. I mean, there's probably a million other films that I can think of right now at the top of my head that my horror colleagues would be able to tell you about.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. And Dana and everyone else who is still here with us, I just wanted to say that when Daisuke called this a preview, it's because what we would like to do next year is actually show Memory, A Leap of Faith, and 7052.
78, 52, yeah.
58, sorry. I don't know why. Yeah.
No, it's okay.
So please stay tuned, and it will be like a really great event. We expect next year at some point, hopefully in person. But let me just take this opportunity to thank Alexandre so much for this.
Thank you.
For this. I learned so much every time. So this
Likewise.
Yeah, this is really, really great. Thank you. I'll hand this over to my colleague and friend Daisuke to close things off. But I wanted to say thank you personally before.
Thank you very much, Denise. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so very much, Alexandre, for joining us with your fantastic rereadings of your film, readings of Alien and beyond. And Denise, thank you so much for make our conversations substantial historically and theoretically as well. Thank you so much, Denise. And thank you everyone for your fantastic questions, insightful comments. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Anna-Marie, for coordinating this technical, Zoom webinar. Thank you so much. And as Denise said, this is the first of lots of, coming events that we want to do with you all. So stay tuned, and this is to be continued. But thank you so very much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.